I was 8 months pregnant when I came home early from a doctor's appointment and found my husband's ex-girlfriend unpacking her suitcase in our bedroom, hanging her dresses in my closet, on my side, next to the little row of maternity clothes I had just bought for the baby we were about to bring into the world. Before you keep reading, if you believe in kindness, in forgiveness, in second chances, and in the quiet kind of hope that gets people through their darkest days, take a moment right now to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. Our community was built on stories like this one, stories about ordinary people finding the courage to start over, and I promise you, this story is going to stay with you long after it ends. My name is Claire Bennett, and 3 years ago I believed I had built a good life. I was 31 years old, working as a paralegal at a small firm in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was married to a man named Grant Whitfield, a contractor with an easy laugh and a way of making every room feel warmer just by walking into it. We had met at a mutual friend's barbecue, the kind of golden afternoon where the light hits everything just right, and within a year we were married in a small ceremony in my mother's backyard, under a string of lights my father had hung the night before he passed away from a heart attack, only 6 months before the wedding. I carried a piece of my father's flannel shirt folded into my bouquet that day, and I remember thinking that grief and joy could live in the same heart at the same time, that life had a strange, generous way of handing you both at once. Grant and I had been trying for a baby for almost 2 years before it finally happened, and when the second pink line appeared on the test, I sat on the bathroom floor and cried the kind of tears that come from somewhere deeper than happiness, somewhere that remembers loss and disappointment and the quiet ache of empty months. Grant had come running when he heard me crying, certain something was wrong, and when I held up the test with shaking hands, he had picked me up off that bathroom floor like I weighed nothing at all, spinning me in a slow circle while I laughed and cried at the same time. For a while after that, our house on Willow Creek Lane felt like it was made of light. Grant painted the nursery a soft sage green because we didn't want to know the baby's gender, he said, we just wanted to be surprised, the same way life had surprised us. He built a bookshelf with his own hands and carved our baby's due date into the underside of the bottom shelf, a hidden little secret only we would ever know was there. But somewhere around my 6th month of pregnancy, something in Grant began to shift, the way weather changes before you can name the storm that's coming. He started staying later at job sites. He started taking phone calls in the garage with the door shut. He started flinching, just slightly, whenever I mentioned baby names or asked him to feel the baby kick. I told myself it was stress, that new fatherhood terrified even the best men, that the responsibility of providing for a family could make anyone go quiet and distant for a while. I gave him grace because that is what love does, it gives grace even when grace is not deserved, and I did not yet know how much that grace would cost me. The morning everything broke apart started like any other. I had a routine prenatal appointment scheduled for 10, and Grant had told me he had an early framing job across town and wouldn't be able to drive me, which was unusual because he had come to every single appointment since we found out I was pregnant, holding my hand through every ultrasound, asking the technician a dozen questions about growth percentiles and heart rates. I drove myself that day, telling myself it was fine, that I was capable, that marriages had rough patches and this was simply one of them. The appointment ended early because the doctor had a cancellation before mine, and I found myself driving home nearly 2 hours before I expected to be there, with a manila folder full of ultrasound photos on the passenger seat and a strange, hollow feeling in my chest that I couldn't explain. When I pulled into our driveway, there was a car I didn't recognize parked where Grant's truck usually sat, a white sedan with a University of Georgia sticker in the back window. My hand trembled slightly as I put my key in the front door, some instinct older than logic already bracing me for what I was about to find. The house was quiet except for the sound of hangers sliding across the closet rod upstairs, a domestic, ordinary sound that somehow made what came next even more devastating. I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the railing, one hand cradling the underside of my belly the way I had learned to do in my 3rd trimester, and when I reached the doorway of our bedroom, the room where Grant and I had painted the walls together, where we had made love and made promises and made a baby, I saw a woman I had never met standing at my closet, hanging a row of blouses on hangers I recognized as mine, her own suitcase open on our bed, spilling over with clothes and shoes and A framed photograph of her and Grant from what looked like years ago, both of them younger, both of them laughing on a beach somewhere. She turned when she heard me in the doorway, and for a moment neither of us said anything. She was beautiful in an effortless way, the kind of beauty that made me suddenly conscious of my swollen ankles and the maternity dress stretched over my belly. "You must be Claire," she said finally, and there was no cruelty in her voice, which somehow made it worse, as if I were the one intruding on her life instead of the other way around. "I'm Vanessa. Grant didn't tell you I was coming, did he?" It wasn't really a question. I remember standing there, one hand still on the doorframe, feeling the baby shift inside me as if even my unborn child could sense that the ground beneath us had just given way. Grant came home 40 minutes later to find me sitting on the porch steps, because I could not make myself go back into that bedroom, could not make myself breathe the same air as a stranger's perfume in the space where I had once felt safest. He saw my face and he knew immediately that something in him had been exposed, and to his credit, he did not lie to me, not at first. He sat down beside me on the steps, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off him, and he told me that Vanessa was his college girlfriend, the woman he had almost married 8 years before he met me, and that her marriage had recently collapsed, that she had nowhere else to go, that he had told her she could stay with us for a few weeks while she got back on her feet. He said it like it was a small thing, a simple act of charity between old friends, and when I asked him why he hadn't told me, why he hadn't asked me, why he had put her suitcase in our bedroom instead of the guest room down the hall, he looked away from me toward the oak tree in our front yard and said, quietly, that our bedroom had the better mattress, and that Vanessa had a bad back. I want you to sit with that for a moment, the way I had to sit with it on those porch steps, 8 months pregnant, my whole body aching with the physical weight of the baby I was carrying and the invisible weight of a betrayal I did not yet have words for. It would be easy to tell you that I screamed, that I threw something, that I demanded he choose between us right there on the steps, but the truth is that shock does not always look like fury. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a woman sitting perfectly still while her whole understanding of her life rearranges itself around her, brick by brick, until she cannot recognize the shape of the home she thought she had built. Over the next several days, I watched my husband become a stranger wearing a familiar face. Vanessa did not leave. She stayed in our bedroom while Grant moved a cot into what was supposed to be our baby's nursery, sleeping beneath the sage-green walls he had painted with his own hands, beneath the bookshelf with our secret due date carved into the wood. He told me it was temporary, that he needed time to sort out his feelings, that seeing Vanessa again had brought up old, unresolved emotions he thought he had buried, and that he owed it to himself, to us, to figure out what those feelings meant before our baby arrived. I remember asking him, my voice barely above a whisper, whether he understood that I was the one who was pregnant, that I was the one who needed him now more than I had ever needed anyone in my life, and he looked at me with something that might have been guilt, might have been pity, and said that he was sorry, that this wasn't how he wanted things to go, but that he couldn't just turn off 8 years of history because I was uncomfortable. I moved into the guest room that same night, carrying my pillow down the hallway past the closed door of my own bedroom, past the low murmur of voices on the other side of it, and I lay awake until the sun came up, one hand resting on my belly, whispering to the baby inside me that whatever happened, whatever came next, I would find a way to protect us both. I did not yet know how. I only knew that I would. If you have ever felt betrayed by someone who was supposed to protect you, if you have ever had to find strength you didn't know you had for the sake of someone smaller and more helpless than yourself, I want you to know that you are not alone, and I want you to stay with me through this story, because it does not end where it feels like it's ending right now. The days that followed were some of the strangest of my life. I continued going to work, continued going to my prenatal appointments alone, continued cooking dinner some nights out of sheer habit and eating it by myself at the kitchen table while Grant and Vanessa talked in low voices in the living room about her divorce, about custody arrangements for a dog they apparently used to share, about memories that predated me entirely. My mother, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Diane who had raised me largely alone after my father's early years of struggling with alcoholism before he got sober, drove down from Columbia the moment I called her crying, and she stood in my driveway with her hands on her hips looking at that white sedan with the University of Georgia sticker like it was a physical enemy she intended to fight. My mother wanted me to leave immediately, to pack a bag and come stay with her until the baby was born, and some nights I wanted that too, wanted it so badly I could taste it, the relief of simply walking away from a house that no longer felt like mine. But something kept me there, something stubborn and searching, a need to understand how the man I had married, the man who had carved our baby's due date into a bookshelf, could become someone capable of asking his pregnant wife to sleep in a guest room while his ex-girlfriend slept in their marital bed. I told myself I needed answers before I could leave with any peace, and looking back now, I understand that what I really needed was to witness, with my own eyes, the full shape of what I was up against, so that later, when doubt crept in, when loneliness made me question myself, I would remember exactly why I had to go. It was during this strange, suspended time that I first ran into Sawyer Coleman again, a name I had not thought about in years, a name that used to make Grant's jaw tighten whenever it came up in conversation. Sawyer and Grant had grown up together in the same small town outside Charleston, best friends until their early 20s, when a falling out over a construction business they had tried to start together turned into a bitterness that never fully healed. Grant always told the story as though Sawyer had betrayed him, had cut corners and cheated clients and left Grant to deal with the financial fallout, and I had believed that story for years because I had no reason not to, because I loved Grant and trusted his version of the world. Sawyer had gone on to build his own construction company, larger and more successful than anything Grant had managed on his own, and the two men had not spoken in nearly a decade, their mutual friends having long ago learned not to mention one name in front of the other. I encountered Sawyer at the pharmacy, of all places, both of us standing at the counter waiting for prescriptions, and he recognized me before I recognized him, said my name softly, almost cautiously, as though testing whether I would want to acknowledge him at all given who I was married to. He looked older than I remembered, his dark hair threaded with early gray at the temples, his face weathered in the particular way of a man who spends his life outdoors, but his eyes were kind, quietly attentive in a way that caught me off guard. He asked how I was doing, how the pregnancy was going, and something about the plainness of the question, the absence of any hidden agenda in it, made my composure crack for just a moment, right there in the pharmacy, in front of a man I barely knew. I did not tell him everything that day, only that things at home were difficult, that Grant and I were going through something I didn't fully understand myself, but Sawyer did not push, did not pry, only told me, gently, that if I ever needed anything, needed someone to talk to, needed help of any kind, I could call him, and he wrote his number on the back of a pharmacy receipt and pressed it into my hand before walking out into the parking lot. I stood there for a long moment, holding that receipt, thinking about how strange it was that the man Grant had spent a decade calling his worst enemy was the only person who had asked how I was doing and actually waited to hear the answer. I want to pause here and ask you something, because I think it matters as much as anything else in this story. Have you ever found unexpected kindness in a place you never thought to look for it? Have you ever discovered that the people we're told to fear or resent are not always who we've been led to believe? I'd love for you to think about that as this story continues, and if it resonates with you, hold that thought, because we're going to come back to it before the end. 2 weeks after I found Vanessa unpacking in my bedroom, my water broke 6 days before my due date while I was standing in my kitchen making tea, alone, because Grant had taken Vanessa to look at apartments that afternoon, helping her find a place of her own. He had told me that morning, as though this was a reasonable errand for a man to run while his wife's pregnancy entered its final week. I called Grant 3 times before he picked up, and when he finally answered, his voice thick with something that might have been guilt, I told him my water had broken and that I needed him to come to the hospital. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a pause that told me everything I needed to know about where his priorities had drifted, before he said he was nearly 2 hours away and would come as fast as he could. I did not wait for him. I called my mother, who broke every speed limit between Columbia and Charleston to reach me, but even she could not arrive before the ambulance I eventually called when the contractions intensified faster than I expected, faster than felt survivable, alone in that kitchen with my hand braced against the counter. I remember very little about the ride to the hospital except the paramedic's calm voice telling me to breathe, and I remember thinking, with a strange, sharp clarity, that I did not want Grant in that delivery room even if he did arrive in time, that some fracture inside me had finally, fully broken, and that I could not unknow what I now knew about the kind of man I had married. My daughter was born at 6:47 that evening, 7 days before her due date, weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and a cry that filled the entire delivery room with a sound so fierce and so alive that I forgot, for just a moment, every ounce of pain that had come before it. I named her Josephine, after my father, whose middle name had been Joseph, and I held her against my chest and cried the way I had cried on the bathroom floor 8 months earlier, grief and joy occupying the same heart at the same time, the way they always seemed to in my life. My mother arrived 20 minutes after Josephine was born, and Grant arrived nearly an hour after that, walking into the room with an expression I could not read, some mixture of shame and love and confusion, and when he reached for our daughter, I let him hold her, because whatever had broken between us, she was still his daughter too, and I would not let my anger become a wall between them. But something in me had changed permanently in that delivery room, alone except for strangers in scrubs, and over the following weeks, as I healed from childbirth and learned the exhausting, tender rhythms of caring for a newborn, I began to make a decision I had been circling for months without fully admitting it to myself. Vanessa had finally moved out 2 days after Josephine's birth, into an apartment Grant had helped her secure, and I remember standing at our bedroom window watching him carry the last of her boxes to her car, laughing at something she said, easy and familiar in a way he had not been with me in months, and I understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in its finality, that I could not build a life inside a marriage where I would always come second to a history I had never been part of. I filed for divorce when Josephine was 6 weeks old. Grant did not fight it, not really, though he made a show of surprise, of hurt, as though he had not spent the last several months systematically demonstrating to me exactly where I stood in his priorities. My mother helped me pack up the house on Willow Creek Lane, and I moved with Josephine into a small rental near my mother's place in Columbia, a modest 2-bedroom with a crooked porch and a yard full of overgrown azaleas that I promised myself I would tend to once I found the energy, once the fog of new motherhood and grief and betrayal began to lift even slightly. Those early months as a single mother were some of the hardest of my life, and I will not pretend otherwise for the sake of a tidier story. There were nights I sat on the floor of Josephine's nursery, rocking her at 3 in the morning, crying quietly so I wouldn't wake her, wondering how I had ended up here, wondering what I had done wrong, wondering whether love was simply not built to last, whether every good thing eventually curdled into something unrecognizable. My mother came by nearly every day, bringing casseroles and diapers and an unshakable, fierce belief that I was going to be all right, that Josephine was going to be all right, that we were Bennett women and Bennett women did not break, we bent, we adapted, we survived. I clung to her certainty on the days I couldn't find my own. It was during this time that Sawyer Coleman reappeared in my life, not dramatically, not with any grand gesture, but quietly, the way certain good things enter our lives when we are least prepared to notice them. He had heard through the small, tangled web of mutual acquaintances that Grant and I had divorced, and he called the number I had given him months before, the one from the pharmacy receipt I had never quite thrown away, asking simply if I needed anything, if there was anything he could do to help. I told him, honestly, that I didn't know, that I was barely keeping my head above water, and instead of offering empty platitudes, he showed up the following Saturday with a truck full of tools and offered to fix the sagging porch steps at my rental house, the ones I had been almost too tired to notice needed fixing at all. He came back the next Saturday to fix a leaking faucet. And the Saturday after that, he brought a second-hand rocking chair he had refinished himself, sanding down the old wood until it gleamed, because he had noticed, during his last visit, that I was still nursing Josephine in a hard kitchen chair. I want to be honest with you and tell you that I did not fall in love with Sawyer overnight, that there was no single cinematic moment where the clouds parted and I understood he was meant for me. What happened instead was slower, quieter, more like the way morning light gradually fills a room rather than the sudden flip of a switch. I noticed that he never made me feel like a burden. I noticed that he asked about my day and actually listened to the answer, that he remembered small details, like the fact that Josephine startled at loud noises or that I took my coffee with too much cream because I never had the energy to measure carefully anymore. I noticed that he was patient with my grief, never rushing me toward healing, never suggesting that I should be further along than I was, simply present, steady, unhurried. It took nearly a year before either of us spoke openly about what was growing between us, a year of Saturday visits and long phone calls after Josephine finally went to sleep, and slow, careful trust rebuilding itself in me, one honest conversation at a time. Sawyer told me, eventually, his version of the falling out with Grant, and it was nothing like the story Grant had told me for years. Sawyer had discovered, while going through their shared business accounts, that Grant had been quietly siphoning money into a separate account, preparing to leave Sawyer holding the debt while Grant walked away clean, and when Sawyer confronted him, Grant had spun the story to their mutual friends, painting himself as the wronged party, the honest man betrayed by a greedy business partner, and the story had calcified into truth simply because Grant told it more often and more convincingly. I sat across from Sawyer at my kitchen table the night he told me this, feeling something in my chest crack open with a strange, sad recognition, understanding now that the man I had married had a pattern, a well-worn habit of rewriting reality to cast himself as blameless, and that I had simply been the latest person to believe him. Sawyer proposed to me on a warm afternoon in early spring, 18 months after Josephine was born, not with fireworks or elaborate plans, but simply, honestly, while we sat together on the porch he had once repaired, watching Josephine take her wobbly first steps across the yard among the azaleas I had finally managed to bring back to life. He told me he did not need me to be fully healed to marry him, that healing was not a destination you arrived at before love was allowed to begin, that he simply wanted to spend his life helping me carry whatever weight I was still carrying, for as long as it took, for as long as we both lived. I said yes with tears streaming down my face, and Josephine, not yet 2 years old, clapped her small hands together as though she understood, in some instinctive way, that something good was happening, that the family assembling around her was one built on choice rather than obligation, on honesty rather than convenience. When word reached Grant that I was marrying Sawyer Coleman, the man he had spent a decade calling his worst enemy, he showed up at my mother's house unannounced, furious in a way I had rarely seen from him, demanding to know how I could do this, how I could align myself with the man who had, in his words, destroyed his business and his reputation. I stood in my mother's doorway, Josephine on my hip, and I told him, calmly, that I had heard both versions of that old story now, and that only one of them matched the pattern of the man I had actually been married to. I told him that Sawyer had shown me, in 1,000 small daily ways, exactly who he was, while Grant had shown me, in the most painful way imaginable, exactly who he was too, and that I trusted the evidence of my own eyes far more than I trusted the stories people told to protect their own image. Grant left that day without another word, and I have thought many times since about how strange it is that the ending of one story so often contains the seeds of another, entirely different one, waiting patiently to grow. Before I tell you how this story ends, I want to ask you to do something for me. If any part of this has touched something in you, if you've ever had to rebuild your life after betrayal, or find hope in the years since, Sawyer has legally adopted Josephine, a decision he made not out of obligation but out of a fierce, quiet love that had been building since the first Saturday he showed up to fix my porch steps. Grant sees Josephine occasionally, on a schedule we've worked out through careful, business-like communication, and I have made peace, slowly, with the fact that I cannot control the kind of father he chooses to be,